Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Raggedy Pack, hopping into Season 7 Histories and Lore. Of course, this means we're almost to Season 8 of Game of Thrones. This will be the last Histories and Lore reaction. We do these for you guys, so we hope you enjoy them. I have screened to make sure we do not have any House of the Dragon spoilers, but that, of course, means I had to self-spoil. So, sacrifices must be made. Aha!
Your penance.
So yeah, be sure to check out the early access available on our Patreon right now. You can still get up to like episode 5 right now at the time that this drops on YouTube of Game of Thrones early access. So check those out. And let's get into HOL. HNL?
Let's do it.
HNL.
Boom.
When I fled Westeros, I washed up where most His Grace Knights do.
R.I.P. Jorah.
Golden Company.
R.I.P. Jorah.
Oh, I guess people don't know that we're already that far ahead, but yeah, we're that far ahead.
20,000 battle-hardened men, horses, and even elephants, ready to kill their employers' enemies.
Elephants? You sure about that?
Don't tell
The Golden
Cersei.
Company began as revenge. On his deathbed, a Targaryen king legitimized all his bastards, either to buy his way into the Seven Heavens or spite the family left behind. As everyone knew would happen, his great bastards weren't satisfied with their father's name and wanted his throne as well,
That was quick.
under the banner of the new House Blackfire. Their true-born brothers disagreed. When the Blackfires lost the Civil War, they fled to Essos to gather a new army in return for what was
I
theirs.
panicked and muted the video. Then I remembered I can just turn down my volume.
Forces, who now called himself Bittersteel, decided he could sell his army's services to other lords while waiting to return to Westeros.
Can we look at the screen, or
Golden Company was born.
is the visual
I
bad
think-
too?
For their words, they chose.
Yeah, you can look at
beneath
the
gold
screen. It's just they're talking about
to remind themselves
something
that they
that's
weren't just
spoilery.
hired killers.
But I didn't even think that
Knights
this
of
would be
Westeros
in
would
this.
One day retake their home. They never tried because they were too successful as sellswords.
Okay, I think you can
When Crowhor
unmute.
declined to pay
Okay.
the new Golden Company for its services.
Wow, that was great.
Bittersteel dared what even the Dothraki failed to do and sacked the city. After filling the company's coffers, he declared that unlike all other sellswords, the Golden Company would never break a contract. So they haven't. But they also don't take contracts unless the odds are heavily in their favor. Cowardly, perhaps,
bitches.
but far from foolish. Quite
Already
a few
knew that.
wars have ended with one side learning the Golden Company agreed to fight on the other. Though it's not just their reputation that scares off would-be enemies. For some, it only takes one look at the captain's war tent surrounded by the gilded skulls of former captains. Many
Gilded
splintered
skulls.
with the wounds that killed
You got
them.
extra money, you're gonna dip
Any
in lava?
sellswords who'd waste that much gold must have a lot of it.
They're trying to be
Nobody
Drogo.
pays in defeat. Could the Golden Company ever take Westeros? They get more practice fighting than the average knight.
There's no
Their elephants
chance.
could make a mess on a
No
battlefield.
chance.
But men who fight for gold will never fight as hard as men who fight for home. I should know.
Bars.
Done one. Now I do the other.
The Citadel.
The Citadel of Old Town is the greatest centre of learning in the world. Not that it has much competition, really. Most lords think of books the way they think of younger sons. Useful to have around. as long as they
Speakers
keep to
reflecting the
corners.
light.
Back when
pretty
House
sick.
Hightower still ruled Old Town as kings,
Oh,
a
more
crippled
spoilers.
younger son sought solace in books and those who
But I think
wrote
we're
them,
fine.
and became the greatest patron of learning in his day. Scholars of all sorts flocked to Old Town to debate and write and debate. After this Prince Peremore's death, his brother granted land to Peremore's pets, as the wise men were called, though now they're known as maesters. Like the Night's Watch, the Citadel accepts any boy into its halls, be he a
The
lordling,
five-pronged
peasant or bastard.
Plow?
Merit, not birth, determines advancement. Once a novice proves adept in a field, he forges a chain link that signifies his skill. Black iron is for ravenry, gold for sums and accounts, silver for healing, iron for warfare, Valyrian steel for the higher mysteries. Magic, though nobody likes to say the word in the Citadel. Or or explain how dragons fly or dead men walk. Once an acolyte has forged enough links to make a chain, he becomes a maester. Should he continue his studies, he might rise to archmaester and be given a ring, rod, and mask forged from the appropriate metal for his chosen field.
Never seen this.
The wisest, or most ambitious of the archmaesters might even be called to serve as a grand maester on the small council.
Grand maester is even further beyond.
The king and the realm, as well as
Just think Pycelle held that title.
Informed of everything.
What a joke.
The heart of the Citadel is the library, which contains tomes from all over the world on every subject imaginable, from the trivial to the essential to the restricted.
Oh, we've seen
If the
that.
world ended tomorrow, we could rebuild it with the knowledge contained in these books. Theoretically, let's hope it doesn't come to that. But as every
It's
novice
actually really
learns,
sick how they light it
the
up.
Citadel is more than a building, more than a library, more than the Order of Maesters. It is an idea that we may know the world. Not completely, not in any one man's lifetime, but piece by piece. With each generation building upon the knowledge of their predecessors where they can, and preserving it where they can't. And, unfortunately for us all, forgetting it when they shouldn't.
The prophecies of the known world.
Sam is on a tangent.
The Maesters don't believe in prophecy, with good reason. The children of the forest supposedly could see into the future, yet were surprised by the first men who nearly ended their race, and the long night which nearly ended us all. Some Maesters posit that the children's magical sight was invented long after they vanished from Westeros, by singers hoping to thrill peasant girls. Not that most Maesters have much experience in what does or doesn't do that. When Aegon the Conqueror came to the Iron Islands, the priest King Lodos claimed his divine father, the Ironborn's drowned god, had shown him krakens pulling Aegon's ships into the deep. No krakens ever arrived, and even if they had, they wouldn't have stopped Aegon and his dragons without wings of their own.
Yeah.
Confused, Lodos filled his pockets with stones and walked into the sea to take counsel with his father.
What?
Thousands followed him, but apparently the drowned god didn't appreciate a crowd. Their corpses washed upon the Iron Islands for years.
Okay.
According to legend, House Targaryen survived the doom of Valyria thanks to Daenys the Dreamer, who foresaw the calamity and convinced her father to flee their homeland. It could be true. The Targaryens were always a bit more. But as Maester Yendel points out,
I'm seeing some
in the
parallels.
East, the Targaryens were one of 1,000 minor noble families, and in Westeros they became kings. Politics, not prophecy, could have drawn them to our shores. Politics can also explain the prophecies of Daemon Blackfyre II, a Targaryen bastard rumoured to possess the family gift. While posing as a hedge knight,
The family
he told
gift?
the future Lord Commander of the Kingsguard that he dreamt of a dragon hatching at White Walls Castle, and took it as a sign that he'd win the Iron Throne. Perhaps if he'd slept a bit longer, he'd have dreamt of the King's Hand putting down his rebellion a day later, before it even began. Most Maesters dismiss all Targaryen claims of prophecy as mystic nonsense, a relic of their Eastern ancestry. To be fair, across the Narrow Sea there isn't a market without a warlock from Karth telling fortunes,
Well, that's a
or
White Walker.
shadowbinder from Ashai reading fates in blood. Or so I hear, from the Maesters. But when I was a boy, I overheard the cook whispering to a maid about a woods witch camping outside Horn Hill who was called Maggie the Frog. Now I realise it was probably a corruption of the Eastern word for wizards, Maggie. One day my father
Maggie.
rode out hunting, though no game was in season, and whatever power she had likely didn't save her. Even the wisest Maesters, however, have no answer for the Red
Did we ever get a name of
Priests
the
who
witch
prophesy about the
Cersei
return of the
visited?
Long Night.
I don't think
For
so.
thousands of years, they've kept watch
Perhaps
for the return of the prince
Maggie?
who was promised, who will be born amid salt and smoke to drive off the darkness once again.
Salt and smoke?
Prince of what realm? Promised by whom and to whom? The prophecy doesn't say. But at the very least, it confirms that not even Essos escaped the Long Night. I imagine the cataclysm must have confused the East. Unlike Westeros, they wouldn't have known of the Night King, or the White Walkers, or the war waged by the First Men and the Children of the Forest. They would have just seen a terrible winter descend and linger far too long until spring magically returned to the world.
Yo, where'd the sun go?
Somehow, maybe from passing merchants.
The sun ate the moon, or the moon ate the sun. It is known.
Saw the truth. Now the truth is here again for anyone to see. But the maesters refuse. They debate and question and doubt, not to choose the wisest course, but because they're too used to doing nothing else. Most prophecies might be lies, but not all of them. The long night is coming. If we don't believe that, well, we won't need any prophecy.
Oh, that's actually kind of sick.
Let
Finally, their eyes are open. The Dragon Pit, you said new for
This whole thing, or
me see how it starts.
The Dragon Pit was a marvel of the world. Full-grown Targaryen dragons nested beneath its massive dome.
Yeah, just me for the whole thing.
Darkest
Okay.
nights,
Can we watch it, or do we need to look away?
with the fire of the great
Definitely look away.
inside.
okay.
Okay.
I was really enjoying
As
looking
had
at the dragons.
previous
I guess we'll have to wait, Igloo.
Looked like a bird cage.
When Maegor the Cruel blasted it with dragonfire during morning
Oh.
prayers.
So basically what they're talking about right now, it's about to roll straight into spoilers, but Maegor the Cruel, the Dragon Pit used to be a sept.
But as it dissipated,
Ah.
so
And then Maegor the Cruel came in, blew dragon fire all over the sept and turned it into the Dragon Pit.
sept of remembrance faded from memory.
It's pretty.
And Maegor
Damn, I didn't know
decided to
Cersei was making a
replace
dragon
the
pit.
gods with a monument to his family, the Dragon Pit.
Labor proved elusive, however. For after the Red Keep was
You remember when you
finished,
roasted me about the Dragon
Maegor
Pit and the
had
comments
hosted a
came in like,
three-day
sick.
feast
No, you
with
actually,
all the
Igley's right.
stonemasons and carpenters
No, I
who
don't.
worked to build it. At its conclusion, he slaughtered them, so that only he would know the castle's secrets. So many men fled the construction of the Dragon
remember,
Pit,
Cor?
that Maegor
Yeah,
was
I
forced
saw
to
the
employ the
comments.
prisoners of the city
Yeah.
dungeons, supplemented by skilled and ignorant builders from across the narrow sea.
For more than a century, the Targaryens housed their dragons in the Dragon Pit. But dragons are not horses to be stabled or hounds to be kenneled. With each generation, the dragons became less massive, less swift, less long-lived.
And less invulnerable. During the Dance of Dragons, 2 Targaryen factions killed a handful of their family's dragons while fighting each other. A frenzied mob even broke into the Dragon Pit and slaughtered the 5 dragons chained there, though the last managed to bring down the roof of the Great Dome on its assailants. The dragons never recovered their former strength or numbers. Perhaps their line had been too broken, or perhaps others intervened to break it further. But the last dragon grew no larger than a cat, and its death earned Aegon, third of his name, the epithet Dragonbane.
What is a dragon pit without dragons? The roof remained where it had fallen. The great bronze doors rusted and fell off their hinges.
This bear is still going.
Prostitutes cavorted where fantastic creatures had once fed and slept.
Yes. Well, it was Varys and
Then
Qyburn.
came Daenerys.
Okay.
All right, you can unmute.
Dragons once
Okay.
again
Okay.
darken the sky, but they will never darken the Dragon Pit again. Daenerys has learned the folly of chaining her dragons. The Dragon Pit is,
Yes, she
and
did.
will remain, a ruin of a bygone age, when kings and queens flew high above their countrymen.
Casterly Rock.
According to legend, a huntsman once tracked a lion that was terrorizing his village all the way to its den. Though armed with only a spear, the man managed to kill both the lion and its mate, but spared the cubs. This mercy so pleased the old gods that they sent a shaft of sunlight deep into the cave, gleaming off golden walls. The hunter became a miner and built a ring fort to guard his new wealth. Nobody ever asks what happened to the cubs. Maybe the gods forgot about them and they starved. Maybe there never were any cops, a lions, a hunter. Doesn't matter. Someone found enough gold in that cave to buy whatever truth he wanted, along with a castle that he'd name after his new family. Casterly Rock. Thanks to that gold, Casterly Rock soon became the largest, wealthiest, and best defended castle in Westeros. An army that struggled up the main approach would still have to climb thick, high, and well-defended walls. Should they choose instead to lay siege, the sea helpfully carved a massive cave beneath the castle, which over time became a private port complete with docks, wharves, and shipyards.
That's cool.
And so, to this day, even with all the gold in Westeros to tempt invaders, Casterly Rock has never fallen.
The Rock. Well,
it fell once.
The castle is sadly all that remains of its namesake family, the Casterlys. According to another legend, my ancestor, Lan the Clever, swindled the castle from them. The most common story is that he found a hidden cleft in the rock and snuck into the castle. At night, he whispered threats into sleeping ears, howled in the darkness, planted one brother's treasures in the room of another, and so forth.
Ah, clever.
By the end of his games, the Casterlys believed a demon was haunting their home and fled. My brother prefers a different version. Lan the Clever did find a secret entrance into the rock, but used it to have his way with the Casterly maidens. Eventually, the girls gave birth to golden-haired bastards, and the Casterlys had no choice but to accept their father into the family. In gratitude, he changed the family name to honor himself, and House Lannister was born.
They stole that shit.
Casterlys used
Lannister
the golden
trademark.
rock to become lords. The Lannisters became
Do you guys keep hearing like
guys
the
hear
windows?
that?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's the Windows sound effect. Oh my god, I was being gaslit.
When the Ironborn became a nuisance, my ancestors
I, like,
sailed
looked
to the
over
Iron Islands and returned
at my
with
computer,
100
I'm like,
Ironborn hostages,
huh?
promising
What's going
to
on?
hang one from the rock every time
People watching this
Ironborn
reaction,
dared
we're gonna do the
raid
same
our
thing.
shores. The Ironborn
Lock
stayed
in,
away.
Thrones Insider.
Well, after 20 or so. When the Andals arrived after sweeping across the rest of Westeros, we invited their sons and daughters into the rock as squires and court ladies. I don't think we ever had to
Okay,
any
dude.
of them.
The double.
Finally,
Oh,
Aegon
that was a triple quad.
defeated us on the field of fire, and my ancestor knelt. Still, little changed but titles and taxes. For when Visenya Targaryen saw the rock, she gave thanks that my ancestor had met Aegon on the field. Even Dragonflame would have washed over the castle like the waves and left just as much a mark. But now the mines are dry, and Casterly Rock is just that, a rock. Our gold has passed into legend, just like the merciful huntsman and Lan the Clever. As will our family, if
Or
we
the
lose
three
this war.
cubs.
Unlike the Casterlys, however,
Dead?
we won't even have a castle to remember our name.
Okay. It feels like a little bit
Disciplining unruly
late.
vessels, most lords sent armies. My father Tywin only had to send a singer. There's no faster way to dull a vassal's ambition or any festive occasion than hearing the reigns of Castamere. The House Reign of Castamere was an old and proud house that was slowly sinking back into the muck. Their mines had run dry. Without gold, they turned to a more common source of wealth: daughters. Lady Ellen Rain was betrothed to my great uncle, but when he fell in battle, Lady Ellen sought comfort in his twin brother's bed,
Ellen Rain,
missing
Ellen
out
Payne.
the other woman he promised to marry. Then the husband, who had shared his twin's wife, shared his twin's death on a different battlefield. Lady Ellen flung herself at the new, and married, heir to the rock. But my grandfather Titus was more kitten than lion. He ran away and told his wife of Lady Ellen's designs, and Lady Ellen soon found herself married off to Walter and Tarbeck, lord of another failing house. The Rains and Tarbecks should have sunk into obscurity together, and they would have if not for my grandfather becoming Lord of Casterly Rock. At first, the Westerlands laughed with the Laughing Lion, as the jovial Titus was called. But when men realized this lion had neither teeth nor claws, they started to laugh at him. None laughed harder
Messed
than
up.
the Rains and Tarbecks. Though Lady Ellen was no longer welcome at Casterly Rock, Titus didn't refuse her brothers, Roger and Reynard Rain, not even when they asked for extravagant loans. Thanks to our family's gold, Lady Ellen restored Tarbeck Hall to a splendor she hadn't known since being cast out of our home. When my grandfather broached the subject of repayment, Roger and Reynard only laughed. And soon enough, my grandfather was laughing along with them. Then my father
was plotting.
Tywin returned from the War of the Ninepenny
the goat.
Kings, where he'd seen how the rest of the realm sniggered at House Lannister.
Never seen him like that before.
Determined to restore our proper place.
Oh,
My
nice
father
cape.
demanded the immediate repayment of all debts to the Rock, or a hostage from those who couldn't pay. Reynard Rain merely laughed when he received the raven. Lord Walderan Tarbeck chose to ride to Casterly Rock, sure that he could cow Lord Titus into rescinding my father's commands. He could have, except it wasn't Titus who met him at the gates, but my father, who had Lord Walderan thrown into a dungeon. Lady Ellen protested. The Rains threatened war, and finally my grandfather broke and released Lord Tarbeck with an apology no less. As if
Apology.
bathing himself in shame, Titus further forgave all the Tarbeck debts to our house. To celebrate the end of hostilities, Lord Roger feasted Titus at Castamere, and the two lords proclaimed their friendship for eternity. My father allowed eternity to last a year. When he summoned the Rains and Tarbecks to Casterly Rock to answer for their crimes, they rose in revolt, exactly as he expected. Their defiance gave him a pretext to call his banners and ride for Tarbeck Hall and Castamere with an army behind him. He didn't even bother to inform my grandfather. My father's army descended on the Tarbeck so quickly that Lord Walderan had no time to gather his forces and rode against my father
as much
with
as I
only
hate
his household knights.
Tywin,
Soon, his head, his
he's kind of how like I would play in like a strategy game. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I know.
You can relate, yes, Blake?
No, you're just a lying asshole.
Send ravens to her brothers in Castamere. She assumed they'd have more than enough time to muster their armies and break what would be a long siege. My father had trebuchets up in a day and brought down the keep within hours. Lady Ellen and her son were crushed in its fall.
Damn.
When the Tarbeck forces surrendered, my father put their castle to the torch.
No mercy.
Roger Rain arrived with his army just in time to see the flames consuming his sister's home. He charged my father's camp, hoping surprise would win out over my father's greater numbers. It didn't. With half his men dead on the field and a crossbolt in his back, Lord Roger fled back to Castamere. The Lannister host arrived at Castamere 3 days later. Like Casterly Rock, the seat of House Rain had begun as a mine. When the gold gave out, the mine shafts were widened into halls, galleries, and bedchambers deep beneath the earth. The Rain
I'm
brothers
surprised we're
didn't
getting
have
it
the
like
men to
this
defend the
late.
castle walls and retreated into their underground stronghold. From this relative safety, they offered terms to my father to avoid a long siege. My father didn't reply. Instead, he commanded that the mines be sealed with stone and soil until there was no way in and no way out. When that was completed, it took less than a day to dam the stream beside the castle and only 2 to divert it to the nearest mine entrance.
Oh,
The Rains had taken more than 300 men, women, and children into the mines. A few guards reported hearing faint screams and shouts below them one night, but come dawn, the earth was silent once again.
chill, goddamn.
You play like him,
Now
bro?
the rain weeps
Oh man, maybe a bit too drastic.
with no one left to hear.
Yep. Glad
I
we
like,
get to hear the full story of that, like in detail.
yeah,
This is another one that we're going to mute
All the
halfway
way
through.
Oh, halfway through.
halfway.
King dreams, the hand of the king builds.
As soon as you
Or,
hear
so say
the
the
greatest
kings,
character known to
the
mankind,
hands,
hit the mute
And
button.
the lords who wish to be hands. The lowborn put it differently. The king eats and the hand takes the shit. The fact is, most kings hate ruling. We shouldn't blame them. Their only qualification is blood. So, naturally, they're wary of a
Is that Robert?
seat made of blades.
It is.
Far better to find other men to rule in their stead. But how should a king select his hand? Family? One king chose his brother, Prince Maegor, a warrior who was proud and arrogant. Maegor agreed to marry the High Septon's niece to unite the faith and the crown, but then secretly wed a second wife in Valerian ceremony, artfully combining bigamy and heresy. And when word of it got out, the king was forced to exile Maegor and choose a Septon as his new hand. But the damage had been done. The king had trusted in family, and his brother had set off a rebellion that would claim his rule and his life. Strength? As little more than a boy, Sir Criston Cole replaced the legendary Sir Ryan Redwine on the King's Guard and soon
Are we
was the
muting?
Lord Commander.
Yes.
But
Yes.
knights only know one way to settle
When I said the
disputes.
greatest character, I was being
When
sarcastic.
Prince
I thought
Aegon's
you were giving a
father
quote.
died, Sir Kristen slit
Nah,
the throat
and don't
of an
look.
advisor who objected
don't
to
look.
Aegon's ascension over his aunt, the anointed
I'm
heir.
assuming
His actions so
about
close
to
the
say
new
how he
king,
dies.
Aegon,
If he
second of
dies,
his
Correct.
name.
he's gonna
He
die.
appointed Sir Kristen as his hand in the ensuing civil war, called the Dance of Dragons.
I feel like you could have
Neither Sir
teed us up
Kristen nor the
a little
king,
sooner.
nor even the Targaryen dragons would survive it.
I kind of.
Sir Kristen
Perhaps it's
Cole,
no
there you go.
surprise that the wisest
Okay,
king in
well,
the
I
history
know,
of
I
Westeros
know
made
to
the
watch
wisest
out
choice for
whenever
his hand.
Maegor
The son of
is
a lowly
here.
blacksmith, Septon Barth had few options for advancement in the world, and even fewer after his family gave him to the faith as a child. But as royal
still be
record
muted?
keeper, Barth impressed
Yes.
the king so much that the king, defying all his
I'm assuming for the rest of this
highborn
segment.
advisors, made
No.
Septon Barth his hand.
Okay.
They're just going through
40
every
years of
character death in
prosperity
House of the
ensued.
Dragon right now.
So much did Barth accomplish that many lords and commoners
I think you can unmute now.
Okay.
No other explanation could they accept for a man without blood or skill at arms. Because what Barth had was rarer than both. A sharp mind. Years later, the realm had no sharper mind than Lord Tywin Lannister, hand to King Aerys Targaryen. Or, as
Second
history
mind.
remembers him, the Mad King. He saw assassins and plots in every shadow, heard
Maybe
whispers in
Tywin and I aren't so
silence,
different.
burned men alive. But his greatest madness by far was driving away Lord Tywin. The Mad King then cycled through every mistake of his ancestors. Soldiers, toadying lords, and at the end even an alchemist, perhaps to save the crown's growing
that Dr.
expenses on
Doom?
wildfire. Unfortunately, it didn't save his crown or his dynasty.
RTJ?
The new King Robert chose his foster father, Lord John Arryn, as his hand.
The
The
goat.
wisest decision Robert ever made. Not that it had many rivals.
Is that a little
Too
horse
bad it
toy on his
proved
desk?
So fatal.
Yep.
Lord
That's
Arryn
cute.
was a man of honor from an ancient and proud family. But honor is no shield against the corruption of the capital.
I hate him.
As Lord Arryn's successor, Ned Stark, learned as well.
Did a little finger dirty in that
Perhaps the
picture.
hand of the king is a flawed idea. Westeros needs a ruler who can rule, who builds what he dreams himself. A king who
Like
can't
you?
govern his kingdom is no king, and a hand who shits what another man eats is an arse.
Okay, that was a good one.
Hi, Godden.
We gotta go from Littlefinger to this guy.
The Tyrells claim Highgarden, but they didn't build it. They claim
Who did?
descent from the first king of the Reach, but only through the female line. The truth is that House Gardner built Highgarden when they
Oh.
ruled the Reach as kings, not lords. And as their name attests, they were the true heirs of Garth the Gardener, who founded their house and the kingdom, and brought law and order to the Reach.
I think I need some loppers
He
out
built
there.
Highgarden as
Clear
a
out all that
fortress, not a
brush.
pleasure palace. In those dark days, the Ironborn raided up and down the Mander at will, and the Dornish were even more trouble than they are now.
Damn.
Without enduring shame, a Dornish army once sacked Highgarden and destroyed the Oaken Seat, the living throne of the Gardener Kings planted by Garth Greenhand himself. The Gardeners responded wisely, sending armies of their own to pacify and defend the countryside. My ancestors at Horn Hill joined them, as did the other great families of the Reach. Even House
I ran up
Hightower
on.
yielded without a fight, choosing marriage into House Gardner over a war that would weaken us against outsiders. But the
They say Hightower?
outsiders still came. The Andals swept across Westeros, destroying many ancient families and kingdoms. When the invaders arrived at the Reach, led by Sir Alistair Tyrell, House Gardner chose accommodation over battle, hoping honors and marriages would sate the foreigners' ambitions.
That was a mistake.
The Tyrells were welcomed into service as hereditary stewards of Highgarden. Thousands of years later, they repaid the Gardeners for their acceptance. When Aegon Targaryen declared that Westeros was now his, King Mern IX allied with King Loren Lannister of the Westerlands. Together, they fought to save Westeros from another foreign barbarian, whose family practices put decent men to shame. But the dragons won.
Oh,
And the field of fire claimed Mern and all his sons, grandsons, and brothers. Instead of using the castle for what it was built to do, Harlan
I like all the
Tyrell
overgrown
surrendered it to Aegon without
plants.
a fight. In exchange, Harlan was given the castle his family had served for thousands of years, with all its attendant lands and lords, including my family. Perhaps the Tyrells were great once, but Harlan gave away their honor when he opened gates that weren't his to open, and to a foreign invader. Ever since, there hasn't been a Lord Tyrell who wasn't a mockery of the title. Women rule that house. Everybody knows it. And look what it's wrought. Their proper lord, heir, and queen, dead, leaving only a shrunken old woman who forgets her loyalties to the realm either in grief or dotage. But her thorns won't protect her more than any other rose when the hand comes to rip them out.
She took her own life.
Yeah.
Was assisted.
This world wasn't always so small and petty. Thousands of years ago, while the rest of men prayed,
This one is good.
the Valyrians became them. Through magic or sheer will, they mastered the greatest creatures in history.
They got a lot of towers.
A horse
They
grants
do?
dominion over the land, a ship over the sea. But dragons gave us the sky, and everything and everyone beneath it. At its height, my ancestors ruled the known world. Whatever parts we didn't weren't worth knowing. Our capital of Valyria shamed the magnificent cities of the east, for hammers and chisels were no match for dragon fire and sorcery. It was a city and an empire built to last until the end of time.
And then what happened?
It didn't.
Bomba.
400 years ago,
King
the doom
Ghidorah.
fell on Valyria. Mountains cracked open like eggs, lakes and
Wouldn't it be
rivers
Rodale?
boiled, fountains of fire, ash and smoke spewed from
guess.
the ground, so high and so hot that even dragons burned in flight. The land splintered, and the angry sea rushed in.
One last
In
kiss.
hours, the greatest city in history became history. But my ancestors didn't burn or drown with the rest of their race. 12 years before the doom, despite the sneers of his rivals, Aenar Targaryen abandoned the capital with his
Aenar.
family. Legends claim that his daughter foresaw the destruction of the city in a dream. More likely, Aenar met with some mishap at court and chose exile over execution. He and House Targaryen slinked away to a dreary, remote, god-forsaken island. Forsaken no longer. Art
Lucky.
now lost to the world, we transformed a tiny outpost into Dragonstone, a fortress fit for the last dragon lords. Then Aenar's descendants settled into it like a tomb for their lost homeland. Until Aegon. When he looked east, he saw the past, old, tired, dead. But when he looked west, he saw the future. Gold in the ground, gold in the fields, and no dragons in the sky but his.
Easy
He and his
pickings.
sisters, Rhaenys and Visenya,
Yeah, why
flew
she-
Love how they always draw Visenya looking so,
ostensibly
like,
visitors to a strange land. But when
insane.
Aegon returned,
What do you mean,
he
brother?
ordered construction of a massive table.
Look at her.
carved in the shape
Where
of
are your
Westeros,
eyes
with all the
looking?
notable rivers and mountains that they had seen.
Visenya.
A personal map of the Seven Kingdoms, then ruled by 7 squabbling families.
I don't blame him.
House Durrandon held the Stormlands from their seat at Storm's End, due south of Dragonstone. House Horror of the Iron Islands had also conquered and enslaved the Riverlands and ruled them from Harrenhal, a monstrous castle rising on the shore of the God's Eye. House Stark held the frozen wasteland of the north, the oldest, largest, and emptiest of the kingdoms.
Goats.
House Lannister held the Westerlands, the wealthiest kingdom, thanks to their gold mines. House Gardner held the Reach, the second wealthiest kingdom.
Oh, the hand. Okay.
House Arryn held the Vale. Or rather, the Vale held them. The mountains were impassable except through the Bloody Gate, which had never been taken. House Martell held the deserts of Dawn, probably because no one else wanted them. Together, the Seven Kingdoms made Westeros, a realm that wasn't yet a realm, ruled by great families who didn't know what greatness was. Aegon would teach them.
You're gonna learn today. That was pretty sick.
Bring us the
like,
Aegon series
Darren
expeditiously.
entitled themselves Storm Kings, they were little more than gusts. Their kingdom in the Stormlands had been doddering to its end for the past few centuries, helped along by other houses, most of all by House Horror, who were nearly finished with a monstrous castle at Harrenhal. Too large and too costly a seat to rule only the Riverlands. King Argilac knew where the Ironborn would soon turn. You'd think a king who wanted to keep his crown would be wary of a man with fire-breathing monsters. But King Argilac Durrandon wasn't called the Arrogant for nothing. Determined to arrest his family's decline, he sent an envoy to Dragonstone to enlist Aegon Targaryen and his dragons against his enemies. In exchange, Argilac offered lands he didn't have and a wife Aegon didn't need. For as the Valyrians did, Aegon had wed his elder sister Visenya. Then, as the Valyrians didn't, he took the younger Rhaenys as well. 2 sisters, 2 wives. Perhaps that's why he was so keen to get off Dragonstone. Aegon countered Argilac with courtesy. He sent his own envoy requesting that Princess Durrandon's hand be given instead to Aegon's closest friend and rumored half-brother, Orys Baratheon. Argilac answered with a box and a note. These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me. Inside the box were the hands of Aegon's envoy. How long had Aegon been waiting for such a pretext? As his army prepared to sail, ravens flew to every great lord of the 7 kingdoms. All bore the same message. From this day forth, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down,
they were happy,
and destroyed. Poor old Argilac. He couldn't even match Aegon in arrogance. Aegon landed at the mouth of the Blackwater River and raised a primitive Aegon fort in the disputed land between Harren's and Argilac's kingdom, so that neither could decide whose problem he was.
What a name.
Adopting the customs of the 7 kingdoms,
that's what it means.
His own banner with a red 3-headed dragon breathing fire upon a black field.
Our graphic designer was cooking.
Crowned him with a ruby-studded circlet of Valyrian steel, while Rhaenys hailed him as the first High King the continent had seen since the Dawn Age. As his lords and the gathered locals cheered him, Aegon named his loyal friend to a small council led by Orys Baratheon.
Why does he look like Dario?
He called my strong right hand. The title stuck, and a bastard became the first Hand of the King. But for now, Aegon's kingdom contained only a rocky island and a handful of fields. The other kings had larger armies, ships, castles, and thousands of years of rule. But Aegon had dragons. He had chosen for the words of his house, fire and blood. Before he was done, the rivers, fields, and skies would turn red.
Arryn of House Horror inherited a kingdom that stretched from the Iron Islands to the Triton. Too great a kingdom to rule from a castle as shitty as Pike. For 40 years, his Ironborn plundered the Riverlands for stone, timber, and slaves to build a seat worthy of him. Legend has it that masons laid the final stone in Harrenhal on the very day that Aegon landed in Westeros. Could have been a divine omen. Could have been the masons wanted to fuck off before the dragons got there. They weren't the only ones. At Aegon's approach, Harren's river lords revolted, led by House Tully. I thought Harren noticed. Harrenhal could repel an army of 1,000,000 men. No ladder could summit its walls, and no ram could shatter them. The castle was as impregnable as an old mate's cunt. Harren shut his gates around himself, his sons and his Ironborn, and waited for Aegon's army to drain back into the muck. When Aegon finally saw the monstrous castle, he asked for parley. Harren granted it. Valyria had been the greatest empire the world had ever seen.
Look at that cape.
Harren wanted to piss on its ashes.
Yield now, and you may remain as Lord of the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you.
Is that a snake?
You see my army outside your walls.
It's like it.
Oh, little dragon, maybe.
My dragons.
What is outside my walls is of no concern. Those walls are strong and thick.
Dragons fly.
Trying to tell you.
But stone doesn't burn.
Are you sure about that?
Sets,
If you heat it up enough.
Harren spat and returned to his castle. Once inside, he promised lands, riches, and Tully's daughters to whoever could bring down Aegon or his dragon. As the sun sank below the horizon, all of Harren's men patrolled the battlements, hearing wings in every gust of wind. But the moon rose and sank, and no dragon appeared.
While the Ironborn were ringing the battlements, Aegon drove his dragon Balerion higher and higher in the night sky, so that even the great castle of Harrenhal looked like an anthill below them. Then they plunged straight into the castle, well inside the guarded walls. The 5 towers of Harrenhal reached towards Aegon like a hand. Balerion opened his mouth and bathed all the fingers in flame.
Harren was right. Stone doesn't burn, but men do.
They got cooked.
Even when they're Ironborn.
Like a furnace.
The dragon blasted my ancestors into
a crucible
ash that choked the survivors when they screamed. Harren's soldiers leapt from the battlements and died. They huddled against the walls and died. They fled across the yard and died. Harren and his sons took shelter inside the castle. The stone didn't burn, but as Balerion blasted it with fire, it glowed white hot.
How it feels when your AC breaks in the summer.
Became the world's greatest oven.
Yeah.
The last of
You can relate.
within it.
Outside the castle walls, the towers of Harrenhal glowed red against the night and began to twist and melt like 5 huge candles, with liquid stone trickling down their sides like wax. The next morning, Aegon forged a new Riverlands. He named the rebel Edmund Tully as his Lord Paramount of the Trident, and had the other river lords swear him fealty as their new liege. For centuries, House Horror had terrorized the Riverlands. Under House Tully, the Riverlands would at last return to peace and prosperity. After the castle cooled enough to allow men inside, Aegon ventured into the ruin he'd made of Harrenhal. He saw the ashen bodies, the scorched stone, and the mangled and melted swords of his former enemies. To his men's confusion, he ordered these useless swords collected and sent to his Aegon fort.
Hey, yo. For the start of something new?
Iron Throne,
something great?
Marched on Harrenhal after his coronation. Orys Baratheon had taken most of his forces, and his queen Rhaenys with her dragon, south to deal with the excuse for the invasion. Argilac the Arrogant, king of the Stormlands. Argilac had his seat at Storm's End, a castle considered the most impregnable in Westeros after Harrenhal.
You love that word.
He may have been arrogant, but he wasn't stupid or a coward. His lords advised him to shut his gates and wait out the siege. But he'd heard what had happened at Harrenhal and refused to die a suckling pig cooked in his own castle. He would meet victory or defeat the same way, with sword in hand. He called his banners and marched to meet Orys Baratheon in the field. Thanks to Rhaenyra's dragon, Meraxes, Orys knew Argilac was coming, how many men he had, and how fast he marched. So Orys simply seized the high ground and dug in on the hills to wait for Argilac. As the two armies approached, the wind rose to meet them and the rain poured from the sky, a gale which would give the battle its name, the Last Storm. King Argilac's lords urged him to wait for the weather to die down. But a Storm King saw that the rain was blowing into the faces of the Baratheon men on their hills. And Argilac outnumbered the Baratheon host 2-1, with 4 times as many knights and heavy horse. Argilac attacked. 3 times Argilac led his knights against the Baratheon line, but the hills were steep and the rain had beat the earth to mud. The war horses foundered and slipped, and the chargers collapsed.
Uh-oh.
The battle seemed lost, until Argilac ordered his spearmen up the hill. Blinded by the rain, the Baratheons didn't see them until it was too late. One hill fell, then another, and another, until only one remained in the Baratheon center. If Argilac could break through there, he could split the invading army and flank both halves. Argilac and his men charged, and the Baratheon line broke.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes. Argilac's vanguard burst into flame and his men panicked. The victory charge fell into chaos, and Argilac himself was thrown from his horse. But he didn't
His
yield.
crown.
When Orys Baratheon arrived, he found the old king holding off 6 men, another 6 dead at his feet. Orys dismounted to meet the king on equal footing and offered Argilac one final chance to yield. Argilac cursed him instead. As the storm raged around them, the grizzled old warrior and
Getting
the
the 1v1.
upstart fought for life.
I respect it.
In the end, Argilac got his wish. He died, sword in hand. As word of Argilac's death spread, his lords and knights threw down their swords and fled. Orys and his vanguard rode to Storm's End to claim Argilac's castle for Aegon, only to find the gates barred and the walls manned. Argilac's daughter had assumed his crown, and the new Storm Queen was as fond of yielding as her father.
Okay.
She declared that Orys would win only bones, blood, and ashes here. But her men were weaker than her, and that night Orys found Argilac's daughter delivered, gagged, chained, and naked to his camp.
Oh,
Argilac had refused to give Orys her hand.
Last part necessary?
Now Orys could have any
I
part
don't
of her
think
he
so.
wished. But Orys unchained the girl, wrapped his cloak around her, and poured her a glass of wine.
Okay.
He told her he would take the arms, banner, and words of House Durrandon to honor her father's courage in the last storm. Conveniently, Orys had none of his own to discard first. The crowned stag became the sigil of House Baratheon, and Storm's End their seat. Argilac's daughter would even remain in her home, though as a lady instead of a princess. The Stormlands were now Aegon's, and as tribute, Aegon demanded the swords of the men Orys had defeated.
More swords.
For what purpose? Orys didn't
Wonder what he
know.
wants to do with those.
Dude. We're seeing the pieces come together.
Aegon now ruled 2 of the 7 kingdoms, but he would no longer be able to take the rest piecemeal. For the first time in thousands of years,
So literally just
kings
made
put aside
this
their squabbles
Aegon's
and joined
Conquest
forces
and called
against
it a
the common
day.
enemy.
Yeah.
My ancestor, King Loren of House Lannister, was head of the wealthiest family in the 7 kingdoms. When King Loren joined his forces to Mern of House Gardner, king of the Reach, they had the mightiest army in history, a so-called Iron Fist, to break the would-be conqueror. But while an iron fist can smash a man's face in battle, you'd look silly hunting birds or beasts with it. And Aegon had a creature that was both. The kings had never even seen a dragon, let alone fought one. They had fought each other for thousands of years, and victory always went to the larger army. Surely, a force 5 times that of Aegon's could manage 1 dragon. But Aegon arrived with 3. Still, the Lannisters and Gardeners hoped for victory. The battlefield they chose was a wide plain with firm ground and clear skies, perfect for archers and mounted cavalry. But neither of the kings spared a thought for why the ground was firm. There had been no rain for a fortnight, which meant all the wheat and grass on it were bone dry.
Oh.
Perfect for dragons.
Field of fire.
Perfect for fire,
The
yeah.
kings looked like they would emerge victorious. When the horn blew for battle, their armies swept around Aegon's flanks, and their iron fists of mounted knights smashed through his center before the dragons could even enter the fray. But then, Aegon and his sisters took flight and unleashed their dragons not on
They're
the
just
soldiers,
soloing the verse.
but on the dry fields all around them. The iron fist unclenched and became a hand outstretched for mercy. As Aegon promised, he had none. More than 4,000 men died in the fires, another 1,000 escaping them. Tens of thousands returned home as monsters, burned and scarred beyond recognition. House Gardner never returned at all. Field of Fire, as the saints call it, claimed the last of the Gardner line, and House Tyrell rose in their stead as Lords of the Reach and Wardens of the South. As for my illustrious ancestor, when King Lawrence saw the battle was lost, he rode through a wall of flame and smoke to safety, or at least to a heroic capture a day later, where he laid his sword before Aegon and knelt.
Surrender.
Aegon, true to his word, spared him and confirmed House Lannister as Lords of Casterly Rock and Wardens of the West. Why wouldn't he? A Lannister.
That's 3, boys. That's 3 so far.
And now we owed our lives to the crown. That was worth centuries of subservience at least. Besides, Aegon had a fetish for collecting swords, not heads. He added Lawrence to the pile his men had retrieved from the Field of Fire and sent them back to the Aegon Fort.
A fetish for collecting swords is crazy.
That's hilarious.
You didn't have to word it like that. Just a hobby, bro. Don't make it
the juices flowing.
With most of the South in
Yeah, for his sister wives.
The best chance to throw back the conqueror now lay with the North, if we cared enough to try. Unlike our southern rivals, the Stark Kings of Winter didn't forge the North into one kingdom for glory or gold. There is little of either here, but to survive.
I don't remember seeing wolves in the crypt.
The North remembers when worse than dragons lay waste to armies.
There's one. I think Leanna has one.
The sun
I don't want my dog buried with me.
And the long night began.
Me too.
Yeah.
A new race emerged from the ice and snow, the White Walkers. They demanded no crown, offered no terms, spared no life, and the dead marched with them. With humanity facing extinction, a Stark sought out the children of the forest, the most ancient beings in Westeros, and convinced them to ally with the men they once fought. Together, the two races pushed the Walkers back into the land of always winter and sealed it off from the Seven Kingdoms with the Wall. 300 miles of ice, stone, and earth, rising nearly 700 feet tall. To guard it, they established the Night's Watch, a brotherhood sworn to defend the living from the dead, whose vows erase both titles and crimes.
After the long night, the North tried to forget it belonged to a continent. Perhaps through pride, perhaps through sheer ignorance. You never can tell with the North. But as news of Aegon's dragons spread, Torrhen Stark, the King of Winter, knew he couldn't forget Westeros any longer, and summoned his lords to Winterfell. Many fools shrugged off the threat, while the rest placed wagers on how long the South would take to burn. Torrhen silenced them with a command to assemble their armies and descend from the north in force.
As the kings of the Rock and the Reach burned on the Field of Fire, the greatest northern force since the Long Night crossed the neck into the Riverlands. But when King Torrhen arrived at the Trident, he saw, on the opposing riverbank, the combined strength of all Aegon's conquered kingdoms. A force larger than Torrhen's own by half. And with 3 dragons.
Okay, we can't handle that.
King Torrhen called a conference of all his lords and
Yo, is that Sauron?
Some wanted to fight and trust northern valor to carry the day and burn on the Triton. The wisest of them wanted to withdraw to Moat Cailin, the fortress which had thrown back every southern invasion, and burn there. One suicidal lord even wanted to ambush Aegon's camp in the dark and kill the dragons as they slept, or at the very least, their riders. It's hard to tell what would have been his fate. Burning, beheading, dismemberment.
I think burning's pretty safe bet.
Listened to their counsel, and in the morning crossed the Trident under a flag of parley. Then King Torrhen of House Stark laid his ancient crown at Aegon's feet and was named Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North.
And the king who knelt.
He had no
Messed
choice. And thanks to him, our soldiers returned to their homes whole and
swords.
unharmed.
He saw the big picture.
The swords that Aegon took from them were not twisted, burnt, or mangled.
Yet.
Yeah.
The Vale of Arryn was the last of the great kingdoms left. Old and proud, House Arryn did what they always did in times of strife. They shut the bloody gate, sealing off the Vale. Then the Queen Regent Shara of House Arryn retreated with her son, the boy King Ronald, into the Eyrie, their family's
so it's a hereditary
fortress. From the
You think
top
he's
of
on the
their
mill?
mountain, they could look down on Westeros far below. Its problems
Safe to say.
hidden beneath the clouds. But one day, Queen Shara entered the outer courtyard to find her young son sitting on the knee of Visenya Targaryen and ogling her dragon Vhagar beside her. Just as he'd asked for another cake at dinner, little King Ronald asked his mother if he could go flying on the nice lady's dragon. Visenya smiled at Shara. So
That's
Shara
devious.
did Vhagar. Remembering her manners,
Visenya.
Shara asked if she could have Visenya brought some wine or food. She must be tired after such a long flight. But Visenya demurred. Bored with his mother's pleasantries, Ronald demanded an answer. Poor boy. He didn't even understand the question. Shara hesitated for a moment, then asked Visenya, as a mother, if it was safe for the boy. Visenya assured her it was. What choice did Shara have?
He's gonna go
Once the
flying.
sun circled the castle, she collected his little ringlet, her own regent's coronet, and the ancient falcon crown of mountain and vale which the Arryns had worn for thousands of years. Ronald had taken to the sky as a king, but he landed as a lordling. Perhaps he considered his ancient rights a fair trade for a few minutes of flight, as a little boy would.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's worth.
More likely, he didn't even notice the 3 crowns at Visenya's feet, or recognize the swords of his garrison beside them.
I like that we were taking these places peacefully now. I mean, it's still threatening, but you know.
There could have been blood.
The heads of Westeros had bowed to Aegon, but its heart still beat free. Old Town, the center of the faith of the Seven. There dwelt the High Septon, the father of the faithful, who commanded the obedience of all Westeros, save the savages of the north and their old gods. When Aegon had landed in Westeros, the High Septon had locked himself in the Starry Sept and fasted for 7 days and 7 nights, one for each of his gods. All he received for his trouble was the divine wisdom that if Old Town took up arms against the dragon, the city would burn, faithful and faithless alike. After the submission of House Stark, Aegon marched towards Old Town, steeling himself for another battle. But he found the gates open, with the High Septon welcoming him. The pious fool even had the arrogance to grant what Aegon had already won, and anointed the last Valyrian as Aegon of House Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. As if titles meant anything to a man before whom time itself now bowed. The Maesters would hence divide all history into before and after conquest. Most expected Aegon to stay and make Old Town his seat. But soon after his coronation, Aegon returned to the mouth of the Blackwater River, where he had first set foot on Westeros. A small town had since sprouted around his primitive fort. To honor their new master, the locals dubbed it King's Landing, though it looked unfit for a hedge knight, with wooden palisades, muddy streets,
humble beginnings, you know.
I didn't realize Aegon Fort was King's Landing.
From every corner of the conquest.
Now you know.
When Aegon made it his court, wood became stone, black mud was buried beneath a red keep, and the collected swords of Aegon's foes were blasted by dragonfire and became a seat
Oh my
fit for
God.
the conqueror, and the greatest dynasty this world has
So this
ever
Histories and Lore taught us that
House
Aegon's a kinky boy.
known. My
He likes the swords. I can understand why.
or so it should have been.
So it should have been.
But while Aegon titled himself Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, in reality he held only 6. The 7th, Dawn, had never knelt. Visenya had flown into the Vale and returned with its crown. Mimicking her sister, Rhaenys had flown over the enemy force holding the passes into Dawn and landed in the castle of its ruling lady, Princess Meria of House Martell. Meria was 80 years old, fat, old, and blind. Behind her back, many sniggered at her as the yellow toad of Dawn. The beautiful Rhaenys probably thought as much when they met. She demanded Princess Meria kneel to her brother Aegon, though she allowed that on account of Meria's age and health, a simple vow of submission would do. But the princess told the queen that the Targaryens weren't wanted in Dawn, and no Martell would ever bow, bend, or break, no matter how badly they burned. Rhaenys could have mounted her dragon right then and roasted Meria in the castle as her brother had done at Harrenhal. But whatever she saw in Meria's eyes scared her right back to King's Landing, with a dragon's tail between its legs.
What did you see?
After Aegon's coronation,
see a dragon in there.
Rhaenys returned to Dawn with Aegon and Visenya, and their dragons. But no armies met them in the field, and no lords defied them in their castles. As the dragons approached, Dawn simply emptied. House Martell had learned from Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. The dragons were unbeatable.
Where'd they
battle,
go?
But wars were more than battles. Unopposed, Aegon claimed Dawn for his own, but as soon as he returned to King's Landing, his castellans were hurled off towers, and his royal garrison vanished.
They just dipped and came back after they left?
Again. Except perhaps when the winds change and the sands cough up old bones and armor. Rhaenys returned on Meraxes, intent on revenging herself against Meria Martell, but Dawn was no longer empty. The Dornish kept Meria's promise and fought even while burning under dragon flame. And they won. One day a bolt pierced the eye of Meraxes and knocked the dragon out of the sky. House Martell remained unbroken, unlike the unfortunate Rhaenys. In their wrath, Aegon and Visenya set flame to every castle and city but Sunspear.
See, it's almost like it takes a lucky shot to kill a dragon.
But the Dornish stayed loyal.
Imagine
when
3.
Aegon returned to King's Landing,
This is
assassins waiting for him in the streets of his own capital. If not for Visenya, the conqueror would not have enjoyed his conquest for very long. From then on, the king and his family would be guarded by the 7 greatest knights in the realm, the King's Guard. When Meria died in her sleep, her weak and tired son sued for peace. But old Meria had exhausted Aegon as well, and he granted the request. The Targaryens still wanted Dawn, and eventually they would have it, but not at the point of a sword. They would buy it the same way great lords buy anything, with a daughter.
Now we can stop.
Okay.
Oh.
After the conquest, when men look...
Reason being, the first half of this is like Dance of Dragons.
Okay.
And the second half is like Robert's Rebellion. And so, if we really want to rehash Robert's Rebellion for the 7th straight Histories and Lore episode, we can, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think it's fine. You, Igloo?
So...
Yeah, I'm content. I really like this, like, them basically setting up the pieces of how of Aegon's conquest, and like just one by one all the houses fell.
Same.
I did not know, I mean, I don't know if it was mentioned before, but like that House Martell took out Rhaenys.
Yeah, I know they brought up that they laid siege to Dorne, but I only remember them being unsuccessful. This like new edition of, the death. I don't recall. But it's okay. When the Aegon's Conquest series does eventually come around, I'll have like some knowledge of things that'll happen, but I won't know everything.
I genuinely think, and this is just what they should do. Like, let George finish shit.
The books.
before adapting it, and then adapt it. That's what you should do. I understand that there were some changes when it comes to season 2 of House of the Dragon, but I don't know what those changes are. I don't have an opinion on them. But just adapt.
Mm-hmm.
If you get to the point where you got to when it comes to season 8 of Game of Thrones with D&D, bring in more than just 2 people to finish the story. But when it comes to Aegon's Conquest, just adapt that shit. Even if they did it animated, that would make banger bucks.
That would go hard.
Yeah.
Banger bucks. HBO would be gooning.
You learned a new word today.
I did.
I really enjoyed Histories and Lore. I know this was the last one. So
what do you mean? We got season 8.
Season 8 doesn't need or deserve Histories and Lore. But yeah, I really enjoy learning all the extra stuff that isn't in the show because, of course, before we started watching Game of Thrones on the channel, I'd watched through it multiple times, so I kind of knew everything the show had to offer. Of course, on a rewatch, you do pick up little details and such, but this is just like information overload. It hits you with stuff you wouldn't really know unless you read the books, which I have not.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you have the books, Igley, so after we're done with Game of Thrones soon, I'm sure you're going to learn a lot more in there. And I know there are a lot of differences as well. But yeah, as for
finally
this,
break the seal soon.
Yeah. As for this particular Histories and Lore, I really enjoyed all of the Aegon stuff. That was the highlight. And I like the Reigns of Castamere story, getting some expanded lore on that, even though, like you were saying, Igley, it does seem a little late. Better late than never. Then yeah, I always love when they bring back Viserys to narrate some things because we haven't seen that man since like season 1 Game of Thrones. So yeah,
I would be interested to have Viserys come back. You know, obviously his actor's a little bit older now. I'd be interested to have Viserys come back and play Aegon.
Ooh.
Like, yeah, he can do the slimy entitled child act, but what if he does, you know, Aegon the Conqueror? Like, that would go really hard.
Interesting.
He's got range.
And he clearly has a passion for the franchise to have done all these histories and lore years after his character arc ended.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? You already know what he can do. Like Corey said, he's got range. Imagine bro goes from getting the golden shower to giving the Ironborn a golden shower in Harrenhal. So I really enjoyed this one. It was a lot that I think, again, if they just turned it into a series, that it would be so successful.
Agreed.
Half the time I was sitting here and I'm like, God, I just wish I could see this. Even like I said, animate it. I would prefer a live action just because I think that's what everybody would be able to come together and watch and enjoy. But an animated show at the minimum would be fantastic for the Conquest. So let's stop wasting our time raging about season 8 of Game of Thrones. Let's just forget it happened and let's enjoy the good stuff that George actually wrote. You feel me?
Well said.
Yeah. I mean,
now on that note,
Aegon's Conquest series is confirmed. It's just a matter of when it's going to get here.
Yeah. On that note, we're about to go watch episode 5 of season 8.
Oh boy.
Wow.
All right. Do we have any more thoughts on Histories and Lore?
No, sir.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, hope you enjoyed that. Check out our Game of Thrones reactions. Check out our early access on Patreon. And we'll see you guys very shortly in the next one.
See ya.
See ya.